All right, so this one's pretty wild. We've got Russian soldiers trying to dodge Ukrainian drones on the Dnipro River, and these guys are so aware of what's coming that they're wearing tourniquets ahead of time. As in, they expect to get hit, and the couple seconds it would take to put the tourniquet on could be the matter of life and death. So these guys strap on before they go out. Now, this footage just came out, and I wanted to share it because it's pretty wild. We haven't seen anything like this that I can recall. You can see the Ukrainian drone splashing near the boat. You can see on the back there, those are electronic warfare jammers. So what the jammers do in this case is between, depends on the technology, but 25, 50, 100, 150 meters, it will jam the signal between the drone and the operator, causing the drone to either fall off path or lose the connection, and it has to try to, they do have some of this technology now, strike the target on its own. When it's a moving target at this speed, you can see how that would result in near misses, and that's what you see a bunch of here. Now, at the end of the day, Ukraine does end up hitting at least this boat, maybe another. Think about the ammo the guys are going through on board here, the number of shotguns and AKs. They're just slinging lead into the air, trying to bring these things down, which can work. And we're going to see it work a couple times in this video. I think we got one coming up here. But there's the tourniquet strapped to the guy's leg, right? Ready to go, kind of expecting to get hit by one of these. Now, in talking with Vegas from the Azov International Battalion, Different Breed TV, a couple weeks ago about shotguns, oh, Jesus, that was right there. He says they're not as perfect as people might think for this role. It's something, certainly. But if you're thinking about an infantryman having to carry this, it's a lot of extra weight, a lot of extra equipment. And he said there's just not a perfect solution because you get some of the smaller BBs like you might get with birdshot. It might not be enough, might not be powerful enough to actually bring the drone down. And then you have to worry about the spread and the distance. So shotgun pellets spread out wider and wider the further away they are, which means the closer into the barrel, the closer the spread, the more BBs or more pellets are going to hit the drone. So this is really trying to hit something in the last 20, 30 meters maybe before it strikes your position. It's absolutely a tool of last resort. And we will see a couple, either shotguns or AKs, effectively shoot down some of these drones. But look at the boat, just having to go in circles to dodge this. We're seeing volumes in the battlefield of drones right now that are just shocking. Like, how many have you seen there's a hit. How many have you seen at this point, right? 20, 30, maybe, at least in this clip? Even with the electronic warfare strapped on. There we go. Actually knocked one out. So at the end of the day, it looks like at least one of these boats takes a pretty good beating, and they start loading up the survivors to bring them to whatever forward position they are moving to. But pretty wild footage here, start to finish. Now, today we're going to be taking a look at a couple battlefield updates around Zaporizhzhia and Pokrovsk. Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine, is having some issues holding the lines in the east. We've seen them have to withdraw in recent days. No doubt a troubling situation there. Further northeast in Pokrovsk, there's an interesting situation where Russia may have prematurely celebrated the fall of that city, and very clearly Ukraine is still fighting for a significant portion of it. That may have led to some constraints on Russian commanders as they ask for more manpower and more equipment. As that ask goes up the chain, they're saying, wait a minute, I thought you'd taken that city. What's the issue here? But more on that in a second. First, an update on the fundraiser. We're at about $25,000 raised for the 429th Separate Unmanned Systems Regiment Achilles. We're helping these guys pick up drone interceptors, so to bring down FPVs, recon drones, Lancet-type strike drones, and then, of course, the long-range Shahed drones that are day in and day out striking targets not just near the front line, but also deep inside of Ukraine, targeting civilian infrastructure. So we just rolled out some new incentives with this through Zynga's Paw, where $200 plus donations get a patch from Achilles, pretty unique patch there. And then even better than that, $1,000 plus gets you a flag signed by members of the Achilles Regiment. So for those interested in Able, the link to contribute will be in the description below. Now, shifting over to a map here, I was going to use Deep State Map. It's glitching out on me a little bit right now, so today we're using Suryak Map. A couple different areas we're going to look at. So Pokrovsk right here in the center. We're going to come back to that because in the last couple days, we've actually seen pretty significant, all things considered, Russian advances over here near Zaporizhzhia, especially to the northeast in this sector here that I'm circling on the map. So a couple different sources here. I want to start with the Ukrainian aligned source, ISW, Institute for the Study of War, that says the situation in the Huliopol direction, so you can see that right in the middle of this pocket that's forming, is deteriorating. Although Russian forces will probably spend considerable time setting conditions for efforts to seize the settlement, Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Syrsky stated on November 12th that the situation in these directions has significantly worsened as Russian forces are taking advantage of poor weather conditions to infiltrate between Ukrainian positions and have seized 3 unspecified settlements. I don't know that we need to call these unspecified. It looks like in the last couple days, it's probably at least a couple of these here. The reason I like Deep State Map is we can move back and forth between dates. We don't have that option with Suryak. But if you go back just a week or two, you would see that this whole section here has recently come under Russian control. So take your pick in terms of which one of these settlements they're talking about falling to Russian forces. Russian military correspondent and military informant said, quote, "The enemy clearly lacks personnel to defend a front even a few kilometers wide, which the Russian armed forces are now advancing on in several directions simultaneously. The reliance on drones has allowed the armed forces of Ukraine to successfully repel large mechanized assaults in localized areas, but now the shortage of personnel in the trenches is becoming increasingly apparent. A city or village cannot be held with a drone." That infiltration type tactics we're going to talk more about when looking at Pokrovsk here in a minute. And as some of the guys that we interviewed in Azov a few weeks ago talked about when looking at the Zaporizhzhia salient, they said this infiltration type tactic is incredibly effective if you don't care about losing manpower, which is a deadly recipe for Russian forces, especially from Ukraine's perspective, because we've not seen a lot of evidence that Russia cares all that much about their infantry. So if they're able to send a couple through at a time and actually make advances, that's what's working. It appears to be what's working in Zaporizhzhia right now as well. Another military correspondent, Russian, War Gonzo here, says, quote, "The Ukrainian armed forces officially confirmed a withdrawal in the area of Rovnpilia." So this settlement here, this is an area that is not yet marked as under Russian control on other maps, but Suryak does have the Russian advance moving this far west. He says in a statement by the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine, it was reported that on the evening of November 11th, Ukrainian troops were forced to move to more advantageous lines after comprehensive damage. In fact, this means that the Ukrainian Armed Forces units abandoned fortified positions under heavy pressure from Russian troops. It later became known that the withdrawal was carried out on several sections of the front in the Zaporizhzhia region. Meanwhile, fighting continues to intensify. Russian units maintain strategic initiative, methodically advancing forward and creating a real threat of complete breakthrough in the Ukrainian defense in this direction. A key here, of course, and you'll hear this from sources on both sides, Huliopol right here. You can see that it has spokes running out to the east or southeast, north, and west. This is kind of a hub of logistics and defense for this pocket in the eastern portion of Zaporizhzhia. So Russia has been trying for quite a while to attack from the south and southeast. They've not seen very much success. It looks like now they're going to be trying to come in from the north, this kind of encirclement type strategy through infiltration. We've seen it work elsewhere. This is going to be an area to keep an eye on, no doubt. Now, shifting up a little northeast to Pokrovsk, the area that's getting the most attention right now, you can see this pocket continuing to kind of close in. However, it's not closed entirely. And in fact, this map here shows all of Pokrovsk under Russian control, and this might actually be an issue for Russia. As in, if you recall a couple weeks ago, Putin was saying, let's send in international observers so they can see the trapped Ukrainian soldiers that are here and maybe convince them and the Ukrainian government to surrender. But the fighting's still ongoing. Last night, there was footage and documentation of fighting south of the rail line. Most of these areas to the north are not held by Russia. There's 1 or 2 Russian soldiers, maybe, at times. The fight here is very much still ongoing. In fact, ISW, Institute for the Study of War, said, quote, "Russian forces appear to be struggling to conduct successful ground assaults to take and hold additional ground, despite conducting a successful battlefield air interdiction campaign and infiltration missions to degrade Ukrainian defenses and logistics in Pokrovsk and Minograd." Malcontent News, and great source covering the war, summed this up, I think, perfectly when he said, quote, "Field commanders told Gerasimov that the encirclement of Pokrovsk and Minograd was complete." You'll remember that from a couple weeks ago. Gerasimov told Putin publicly on October 29th, "Great victory. 31 Ukrainian brigades hopelessly encircled." But it wasn't reality. Now, because Russian field commanders claimed mission accomplishment when it wasn't, their resources are throttled. Asking for more exposes the Asking for more exposes the original lie. Wait, why are you asking for fire missions and airstrikes in areas you claimed are already under your control? So it's motor cavalry and meat supported by drones, then the Russian offensive stalls. This has happened over and over and over again. Again, we noted this when it happened, that Russian sources were very quick to claim victory here and say, the battle's over, we did it, great job. They started talking about what's next. I think it was a week, maybe a week and a half ago, Russian forces, Russian mill bloggers, very prominent mill bloggers, were talking about what comes after this is completely closed off. They said it's time to move on. Pokrovsk is done. Put a pin in it. They started talking about Konstantinivka up here to the northeast, and already about Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, the inevitable assault to take the rest of Donetsk is what they said. Meanwhile, the fighting in Pokrovsk is very much still ongoing, and it looks like, through a couple of different assessments, that the Russian offensive operations there have slowed in recent days, and it might very well be what Malcontent News says. Hey, Russia is reallocating resources elsewhere because up the chain of command, they said there's nothing really going on there anymore. We got it. You can shift forces to, Zaporizhzhia or elsewhere. In fact, ISW says Russian forces will likely collapse the pocket around Pokrovsk and Leningrad, but the significance of seizing these towns will depend on the circumstances and conduct of the Ukrainian withdrawal. We've talked about this before. Every inch matters, right? So let's be clear right there. But the importance of Pokrovsk and Leningrad as a logistics hub to the east has not been the case for some time, right? This push here up near Poltava, that severed the line to the east months ago. Ever since then, the logistical significance, the administrative significance of these areas has fallen day by day. That said, it is easier for Ukraine to defend some of this area than it will be some of these open fields and tree lines to the north. ISW says the urban terrain of Pokrovsk and Leningrad is not conducive to mechanized, motorized, or mass infantry assaults intended to expand control of terrain, unlike the Russian infiltration missions. Russian forces are also struggling to extend logistics that would more easily enable Russian infantry, who have already infiltrated into Pokrovsk, to consolidate positions and accumulate personnel for further assaults. And Ukrainian sources were talking about that in the last couple days as well, saying it's not just about hunting the estimated 200 to 300 Russian forces that are in the city of Pokrovsk right now, which, it's a big number. 300 is a big number. That's very spread out across this entire area, and there's really nowhere else along the front where we would say 300 troops in there constitutes Russian control of that terrain. The control is really being dictated by drones right now, and a lot of the Ukrainian drones are being used not just to hunt down the Russian infiltrators, but also hammer the logistics routes to the west and the south, hitting anything of any size moving into the city. Now, Euromaidan had a little more optimistic view of this, where they said, quote, Russian forces are disintegrating in Pokrovsk as soldiers systematically refuse combat orders. Videos from the front show officers recording troops who say they'd rather face prison than enter the town, which has become synonymous with certain death. I think that's probably a bit overly optimistic in Ukraine's favor. We've seen this over and over and over again, to quote Malcontent News, where there are some of these areas where the Russian losses are just staggering moving forward. It's video after video, day after day of 1, 2, 3 Russian soldiers at a time getting hunted down and killed by Ukrainian drones. That footage is being seen in Russia, right? They see their buddies going on assaults and not coming back. At some point, it's just common sense, just human nature to say, wait a minute, I don't want to do that. You're going to throw me in jail instead? Fine. What do you think the expected casualty, the loss rate is for individual assault troops moving into Pokrovsk? It's got to be north of 50%. Again, if we're talking about 200 to 300 Russian soldiers in Pokrovsk itself, and this fighting, this offensive, especially around the city, has been going on for 6 to 9 months, how many soldiers were lost in the process of getting there, right? It's staggering. They say the battle has evolved into small unit shadow warfare fought by groups of 2 or 3 soldiers. Drone dominance prevents any large-scale movement. Main forces from both sides remain 10 kilometers outside of town limits, unable to cross open ground without immediate detection and destruction. For Russia, this creates an unsustainable dynamic. Their units, filled with unwilling conscripts and penal soldiers, can't function in combat that rewards skill and awareness over numbers. The strategic goal isn't holding every block, but keeping Russian control south of the railway line, maintaining the logistics corridor that allows Pokrovsk to resist or conduct organized withdrawal if needed. And there's definitely a discrepancy in the quality of troops we've seen during some of these infiltration tactics. And it's mixed. At times, you see more Spetsnaz, special operations forces, being utilized by Russia to carry out this type of mission. But for a long time, that's not been the case in Pokrovsk. It's gone down the ladder in terms of capabilities, and we're seeing older and less well-equipped Russians being pushed forward in groups of 1, 2, or 3. They are being met with, instead of just traditional Ukrainian line infantry, we're seeing some of the more elite Ukrainian units moving in from GUR, from SBU, Azov, the 1st Azov Corps, and others pushing in here, special operations groups, specifically hunting down these small groups of Russian conscripts or mobilized infantry or less trained personnel as they're hiding out in basements in Pokrovsk. Now, General Syrskyi, talking about all of this earlier today, said, quote, "The Pokrovsk direction remains the main focus in the context of the enemy's offensive. The largest number of daily enemy assault actions are recorded here, and a significant part of its grouping operating on the territory of Ukraine is concentrated here. Our main tasks remain the gradual control of designated areas, support and protection of existing logistical routes, as well as the organization of additional ones to timely provide our defenders with everything necessary and ensure uninterrupted evacuation of the wounded. On the approaches and directly in the urban area, constant fighting continues with small enemy assault infantry groups and, less frequently, the destruction of light enemy equipment. There is no talk of Russian control over the city of Pokrovsk or operational encirclement of the defense forces grouping." So again, it's getting very challenging. I don't want to underplay this at all. Pokrovsk is a very tenuous situation for Ukraine. You see on Suryak map here, they've already got the northern approaches west of Verdinsky under Russian control. That's technically the last possible evacuation route. That's not just moving across open terrain. If this is something that Russia's been focused on now for quite a while, when they realize the challenges of actually pushing through Pokrovsk, they try to circle around to the north. If they shut this off, it's less and less likely that Ukraine will be able to successfully evacuate not just the wounded, but the able-bodied soldiers here that are still holding the defense. Again, I think ISW did a good job of saying the significance of this pocket in terms of the impact to the Ukrainian war effort has to do with how it all wraps up. Are they able to, conduct a fighting withdrawal and force Russia to take significant casualties on their way out? Or do we see a scenario where, to go back to the beginning of the war, Azovstal, where a number of Ukrainian forces end up being surrounded? That is still up in the air. And according to General Syrskyi, that's what they're fighting to avoid right now. Maintain these logistical routes, maintain some of these open paths, more open paths than others, so they can get the wounded out and resupplies in. But again, very, very difficult situation in Pokrovsk, and just over the last couple days, we've seen some issues expand further to the southwest around Zaporizhzhia. Both areas we're going to do our best to keep an eye on. But that's all we got for now. Again, for those able and interested to contribute to the ongoing fundraiser to pick up some interceptors for the 429th Achilles, that link is in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.